I wonder if Joseph ever asked for a sign. I wouldn't blame him if he did. He had a big decision to make. We heard all that in the first reading from Isaiah of when to ask for a sign and what that would mean for God to give a sign and so on. I wonder if that occurred to Joseph, that he needed some help with this decision. I wonder if you've ever asked for a sign, or wondered even how to go about that, or how do signs work, or who gets them, and why don't I? Maybe for Joseph, though, it wasn't clear that he had a decision to make. Maybe it wasn't clear at first. There was a path, a pretty clear path laid out for him by his society, by his family, by his religion, of just what he should do. He needed to, almost, you could call it press charges. He needed to make a public statement of what seems to have happened. It's spelled out in Deuteronomy if you want to know the process. And it clears Joseph of any suspicion of impropriety, clears his family name from having gotten mixed up in this engagement. It is, at least in many people's eyes, the way to please God in this difficult situation. But here's the first thing we learn about Joseph. Joseph is someone who thinks he does have a decision to make. He needs to think about this. Is there another option? Is there perhaps a more compassionate option? There is, but it's also a more complex option for him. And Joseph makes up his mind. Before he's even had anything like a sign from God, he makes his decision. He's not going to go the obvious route. Now think of this decision he makes in the midst of a storm. We can understand this somewhat if you've ever, been dating or engaged, had to deal with parents or in-laws. You can imagine some of what he's dealing with. And certainly in his time and place, the anxiety around the situation is heightened. Different people have different expectations. You can imagine the trouble they had communicating about this situation and what's really happening and what ought to be done. And then the storm of feelings within Joseph. He's heartbroken. I'm sure of it. He may have vengeful feelings, like Mary has betrayed him. Certainly he's confused. Perhaps he feels abandoned, lonely in having to make this decision. But like a lot of wise people, he makes a decision and then he sleeps on it. We know he sleeps on it because that is when the dream comes. An angel's message. And the angel says, "This feels like a mess you're in, Joseph, but it could be something beautiful. Hang in there. What potential? You could be a partner with God in this moment. You've been willing to depart a little bit, significantly from the path that's been set before you. Depart from it a little more. Marry this woman. Name this child an act of adoption. Name this child and give him the name Jesus, the name that means the one who saves." And he awakes. Can a dream be a sign? Maybe. I think often when we're in that moment wishing we had a sign, we'd be grateful for even a dream. But on the other hand, it isn't something concrete. It isn't something you can look to and be reassured. It's just a fleeting moment, something perhaps to reflect on, to remember. He didn't really get a sign. He gets from this angel a promise and an invitation. A promise and an invitation. He hears the promise. He acts on the invitation. And so the story begins. And what an amazing story. You know, we call this little family the Holy Family, which I'm afraid, evokes all of our worst sentimentality and ideas about perfection. The Holy Family. And by Christmas Eve, we'll be in the midst of it, right? Full of sentimental pictures of the two making their way to Jerusalem. And then they're making their way to Bethlehem, and then the three. the new family. They're in the stable. But this Sunday, we're invited, before we get into all that, to remember that the family began as quite a mess. I wonder if this story might be some help to you, as many of you go to see your families this week, or call your families, or have them over, or probably at least think about them this week. Remembering that the family we call the Holy Family started out as quite a mess. There might be some comfort in that. The family Jesus was born into was not the picture-perfect family. As Joseph struggles to decide what to do, all the relationships involved in his family, in Mary's, and between them, all these relationships are a mess. This is an unstable time. Feelings are hurt. People don't know what to do. They don't know what the future holds, and they can't see how it could possibly turn out well. Relationships are strained. They're getting impatient with each other. They're struggling. They're arguing. People won't talk to one another. It's a mess. Then the angel comes to Joseph and says, "You're in a mess, Joseph, right in the middle of it. But you can take this mess and turn it into a family. By marrying Mary and claiming this baby and naming him, you can take this mess and turn it into a family, Joseph. If you want a sign, let this be a sign. Bring order out of chaos. By your actions, your commitment, your steadfast commitment over time, bring hope out of despair. Bring surprising joy. Lighten someone else's load. In the face of anger or judgment, show love. And do it again and again and again, and let that be a sign." You know, I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, we often don't get the sign that we want, or we don't get a sign about the things we most want to get a sign about, a sign from God. Like Joseph, though, we get a promise and an invitation. Like Joseph, sometimes we are called to be the sign from God. We are called to be the sign that we need and that others need. To live in hope. And through that living in hope, become a sign to us and to others of the nearness of God and the love of God. Joseph gets a promise and an invitation, but that's it. The rest he has to live into before he'll see it. He'll have to get married and claim this child and meet all this resistance and protect the child and watch him grow, all of that before he knows what the angel has said to be true. In hope and faith, he is able to step out and become a sign, become part of what God is doing in this world. The very fact that with the help of a dream, it occurs to him to pick an option other than the one he's been given, even beyond the path that he's chosen, that's a sign, a new option that no one has even considered. Doing something different becomes a sign to others. That's the first thing we can take from this gospel when we find ourselves in the midst of a mess. To hear the invitation to partner with God in the midst of it and begin to make something beautiful. It may be that we take this mess and begin, as Joseph did, to make it a family. Or in other ways, to partner with God. And when we make choices that show love in the midst of anger and fear, and so doing, we bring hope in the midst of despair. We can be a sign to ourselves and to others. But it isn't quite true that we only get a promise and an invitation and not a sign. We aren't exactly in Joseph's position because the baby's been born. And there we heard it in the gospel. This is the sign of Emmanuel, of which Isaiah spoke. God with us. We have the sign we need. It's something to remember whenever we find ourselves desiring that sign from God, or caught in the confusion of this life, or wondering whether we should ask for a sign, or what that sign might be, or how all that works, and how to recognize it when it comes. Remember, we have the sign of Emmanuel. Right in the midst of our wondering world, God has placed a sign, not waiting for us to figure out how signs work, not waiting for us to ask for the right thing. God has given us a sign, Emmanuel, God with us. A child has been born. This is your sign for all your wondering and confusing times. The child has been born. He has come. God is with us. Amen.